am So, and Julia Arthur.
And Alex Lee will be attending UVA. Alex Mormon will be attending UNC Wilmington. Victoria Hall is attending UVA. And Sam So is attending Columbia. And Julie Arthur is attending the United States Naval Academy.
And Jenna Pollock is also in this group, but she couldn't be here today.
She's at a graduation at Harvard, what can I say?
So for our project, we actually got to work with engineers from the Navy to build underwater autonomous gliders.
We should have made that.
She does. Speak up.
So we were able to build underwater autonomous gliders for the purpose of collecting environmental data.
So what is an autonomous underwater glider? Basically, in layman's terms, it's an underwater robot that collects data. It's self-controlled. It moves up and down throughout the water column, so you get data from all levels of the water column. It's low energy, low cost, low maintenance, and there's several ways to power it, but ours is powered by a buoyancy engine.
Okay, so just wondering, have any of you guys been to the St. Ocean's Hall in the Smithsonian Natural History Museum? Okay, yeah. They have an exhibition for gliders, and I think they may have the Scarlet glider. And the Scarlet glider is was the first underwater glider that traveled across the Atlantic Ocean. So a bit about the history of gliders. Henry Stallman was the first to recognize the need for a system to remotely collect data because this would reduce human risk as well as research costs. So in 1989, he published a piece widely considered a science fiction where he envisioned using small, inexpensive material to build structures that could collect data globally from the water. So he teamed up with another researcher, Douglas Webb, and they created the first battery-powered glider. And during its initial testing, this glider, also known as the Slocum glider, performed dives up to 20 meters at Lacula Springs in Florida. Next, we have the Spray glider, and the Spray glider was later developed by the Ocean of Naval Research with the support of the Scripps Research Institute and Woodsole Oceanographic Institute to provide long-term ocean measurements. The Spray glider, the body of the Spray glider is torpedo-shaped, and it does not have a dynamic buoyancy, but instead uses a primary lithium battery power and a hydraulic pump to change its density through the water, and so it can move throughout the water. Next, we have Douglas Webb. Douglas Webb was the first person to propose the idea of thermally powered gliders. Essentially, these gliders would use the change in the ocean's thermocline as power for themselves. In December of 2007, the first thermal glider was launched off the coast of St. Thomas, and it has been traveling uninterrupted ever since.
There are quite a few different uses for underwater gliders because they are so versatile. The U.S. Navy is currently using gliders for just different oceanographic data collection, improving positioning of fleets in naval operations, and even submarine hunting and hiding. And there's other current research completely different from the Navy because it can be used, because these gliders don't require humans on board, they don't require any kind of large ships. You can launch them and tell them where to go and they'll follow. You can send them and they can track whale species, they can track penguin migrations without the kind of disruptions that you introduce when you introduce humans into the equation. You can also just use gliders for collecting data, whether that's CTD data, that's connectivity, temperature, and depth, chlorophyll fluorescence, bottom depth, all kinds of stuff, sensors that you could hook up to gliders. That being said, for our project, we didn't have the resources, expertise, time to make something like the Scarlet Knight or the Spray glider, so we created our little mini gliders, especially for shallow water usage and kind of used for rivers, for streams, for close to shore. Our gliders are hooked up with a couple different sensors right now for pressure and temperature, which we will talk about a little bit later. And we hope that in the future, because these are so easy to use, easy to create, and very cost efficient. You'll be able to introduce them into the IBET curriculum here at TJ for use in their water quality testing or other projects throughout freshman year.
This project wouldn't have been possible without our mentors. I think they're all here except for one. Michael Britt-Crane, Tyson Tischer, John Hamilton, and Mario Ziegler. They helped us with programming. I think we'll talk later about that. But they helped us, they provided all the materials necessary to assemble our glider, including the Arduino boards, the plastic, the nose cones, and just all the electronics that go along with this experiment project.
So as Han mentioned, this project required a lot of programming. So for the programming, we used Arduino, which is a language that's similar to C++. It's an open source electronics prototyping platform. And one of the great benefits of it is it's pretty easy to use. All of us had some programming knowledge from freshman year, but we were pretty rusty, and this was easy to use and we kind of learned it as we go. We used it to program both our buoyancy engines and our sensors through the use of an Arduino Pro mini board.
So the first part of the glider that we built is the buoyancy engine, which was really important for the movement of the glider. Basically, the purpose of it is to make the glider move in a sinusoidal pattern in the water. It's a syringe connected to a servo motor, which moves the inside part in and out. So when it sucks in water, it makes the glider more dense than the rest of the water, so the pitch moves down and it sinks into the water. Then when it flushes water out, it's less dense than the water surrounding it, so the pitch moves back up and it rises in the water. So it'll move like this when we send it in. And then this is just a path. This is how the glider looks when we send it into the field. Next, we added the sensors, which gave the glider an actual purpose. As Julia said, we added a temperature and a pressure sensor to our glider. They were attached to a Pro mini board and a micro SD card, which is a mini memory card that we could take out after we sent it into the field, plug it into a computer, and we can actually view all of the data that we got. We covered the two sensors in epoxy, which we called potting them, which just made them waterproof so that it was okay to put them in the water. And then the rest of the circuitry we put in a matchbox container, which was waterproof. And the last part were the wings and the rudder. The wings provide lift, and the rudder is the part on the back that provides direction. We actually made them ourselves. We just cut pieces of hard plastic with X-Acto knives. There was no specific wing design, shape, or size that was particularly beneficial or hurtful to the glider, so they sort of let us design the wings as we wanted. And many of us based our designs off of marine animals.
We did our preliminary testing in one of our large oceanography tanks, which is currently housed in Energy Systems Lab. It's about 750 gallons. We successfully tested 3 of our gliders, which is how many we built, so that's really good. One of the problems we ran into was that, as Julie can show you, the battery inside the temperature sensor package was extremely short-lived. Yeah, it lasted about maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and that could have been effective for long-term research. Although the battery that powered this buoyancy engine was a lot better, we had to order a new part from SparkFun, which supplied our Arduino boards for a battery converter, which could make the batteries last much longer than the sensor package. Another thing we experimented with while doing our preliminary testing in the tank was with ballasting. As you can see, we used washers and steel bars.
An electrical tape.
Yeah, we attached it to the thing with electrical tape. But ballasting is extremely important because we want the glider to rest just under the surface of the water, so that data can be collected constantly.
Troubleshooting was one of the more interesting and more frustrating parts of this project. One of the initial problems we ran into is that the screw in here that connects our movable ballast to our servo that moves it back and forth along the syringe ended up being just a little bit too short initially, so that when our movable ballast was all the way forward, there was no grip there, and the servo would start to pull back, but it didn't have anything to hold on to, so our movable ballast stayed completely extended, and then our glider didn't move. So we had to end up doing is, I don't know if you can all see this green piece, in between the inside part of the syringe and this green piece is about 1/8 of an inch washer, and by putting that washer in, it moved it so that this movable ballast pushed just far enough, though you were still getting the same general usage, but it allowed the lag bolt to maintain hold so that when we started to pull that movable ballast back towards the servo, you maintained contact. Another problem we had was the pressure stop servo malfunction. So what happens is, when this movable ballast hits this top, you don't want your servo to be trying to be forcing it into the end of the syringe where it can't go anywhere. And so it hits pressure, the servo says stop, and it pauses, and it starts to pull back the other way. That's how we get our sinusoidal movement. However, when we first set this up, these screws that was holding everything together weren't quite strong enough. And so what ended up happening is the servo would hit the front of the syringe, and then it would keep pushing, and we just kind of ripped the servo mount off a couple syringes, and we had to go through a couple different trial and error methods of figuring out how to hold everything together, and we ended up with a lot of different tiny screws and bolts and nuts, which has served our purpose as well. And then the last problem was definitely just my fault. This is, in effect, a very fancy water bottle, and if you don't close the top of your water bottle all the way, it's not watertight. So, twice, I may or may not have not quite closed it as far as it needed to be closed, and then we put it in water, and water got inside and broke a couple servos, which wasn't so much of an issue other than the fact that it took time and frustration and a little bit of embarrassment on my part to replace the servos a couple of times, and that it's just another cost that could have been easily avoided for our project. Lesson learned, close your water bottles.
So after we had done our preliminary testing at TJ and had troubleshooted some of our problems, we went to Carter to do some more testing. Before we actually did some testing, we were given a tour of the facilities by Toby Radcliffe. She's at the back there. She's also a researcher at the Naval Surface Warfare Center at Carter. And so one of the reasons why we went to Carter is that they had a 150-foot basin that is, I don't know how much, but 3-4 times larger than what we had at TJ's. 10 times. But so this allowed us to really see how our gliders move through the water and to see if we needed to address any more problems. And here's a video that we took while we were at Carter.
As the video plays, you can see that there's going to be a light inside the glider that changes color. That light worked on 2 of the 3 of our gliders. And as you can see, the light is turning red, so that glider is about to start diving. It's sucking water in and moving its movable ballast forward towards the nose cone. And as it starts to go down, our video is about to cut off. But that green and blue light means that it's done diving. It's still diving. It's done diving, and it's going to start pushing out that water, lessening its density and moving its nose back up towards the surface, and will start to resurface. And that will just keep happening until you take it out of the water.
And here are some pictures that we took while we were at Carter. So on the top left are Jenna and Julia, and they're just working on reassembling their glider. On the right we have Alex, and they're also working on their probes and their gliders in general. On the bottom we have Julia burping her glider, and by burping we mean we plunge the glider just right underneath the surface of the water, and we push all the air out before we actually have the glider dive.
Alright, so after we did our preliminary testing and our testing at Carter Rock, we wanted to test our glider in the field. So we went to Green Springs Gardens Park, which is just a 5-minute drive from TJ, and we tested it successfully in one of their 2 ponds, where we also we ran the glider and we collected data from it. Now, typically in a large glider, you have GPS location, so you can easily retrieve it. But since we were testing our glider for shallow water use and our generally